You are now listening to Renaissance Soul.
What up, though, everybody? This is your boy, Kelly K. Fresh Frazier, and this is another episode of the Renaissance Soul Podcast. And just a reminder, the Renaissance Soul Podcast, originally a Detroit hip-hop website, started back in 2001 by yours truly, was a website centered around the discography of the legendary producer JD, aka J Dilla, before I branched out to all Detroit hip-hop and music. In many cases, Renaissance Soul was the first place you heard many of Detroit music artists that you love today. With its revival as a podcast, each episode will focus on specific topics, an album, an era, a legacy, whatever, from Detroit music of all genres from the past and present, from a historical perspective. For this episode, we're taking a deep dive into the debut studio album, Rotting Piñata, from the Detroit rock band Sponge, with the band's vocalist Vinnie Dombrowski. Sponge is celebrating its 25th anniversary of Rotting Piñata with a big show at St. Andrews Hall in Detroit on Wednesday, November 27th. What a better time to reach out and get the dirt on the making of Rotting Piñata and its impact on 90s rock music with huge hits like Plowed and Molly. Released in August 1994, Rotting Piñata was a bit of a slow burn for Sponge, finally hitting the Billboard 200 in May 1995 with the success of Plowed. Rotting Piñata would eventually be certified gold by the RIAA and be Sponge's most successful album and still feel relevant 25 years later. Vinnie Dombrowski shares with us the track-by-track breakdown of his thoughts in the making of each song on Rotting Piñata, along with the band's critical impact, or even lack thereof in some instances, during this time. While songs like Plowed and Molly were huge hits for the band, and were definitely defining of 1990s rock, comparisons to other bands from that time, like the Stone Temple Pilots, were very much noted in the media, but Dombrowski gives us his thoughts on how Sponge differed from them. And who was in Sponge for the recording of Rotting Piñata? Like I already said, you have Vinnie Dombrowski on the vocals. You have Michael Cross on guitar and backing vocals. You have Tim Cross on bass. You have Jim Mazzola on guitar and backing vocals. And Jimmy Paluzzi on drums and backing vocals. So without further ado, let's get into this interview about Rotting Piñata with Vinnie Dombrowski of Sponge. Congratulations, 25 years of Rotting Piñata.
Yeah, the time has flown by.
Right. So, yeah, we're going to talk about, for this episode, the 25th anniversary of Rotting Piñata, released in 1999 on Work Records. To start things off, when you kind of, after all these years, look back on that album, what sort of comes to mind? What really sticks out about that record?
I think it's more so the era of music in the other groups kind of sticks out for me. We made a record, and we certainly weren't looking to write radio songs that would be around 25 years later, or 25 plus years later. That certainly wasn't the intent, but I think we were part of a music movement that seemed to have endured, and it's pretty amazing to be a part of that. Again, it's not like we sat down and we were listening to radio and going, what kind of songs should we write? To sit there and go, well, Plowed sounded like a hit song at the time, or Molly sounded like a hit song. We really did have that idea in mind. I think it was strong songs, but to have that music last for the length of time it has lasted, it existed on radio, is a pretty amazing thing. To still be part of that radio landscape and the soundtrack of what's on radio now and what was on radio then is a pretty amazing thing.
this would be the debut studio album for Sponge. Before you guys were writing and recording this record, where were you at? Where were the other members of the band at? In your lives, what were we just kind of doing before this record?
Just scraping it out in Detroit, being a band. There really was no other plan. There was nobody in the band that was like, working some amazing day job or, in the middle of a college education someplace, or we were just scraping it out, being in a rock band and writing songs in Detroit. And, really, it's like a lot of folks, they've heard Detroit or what Detroit was or is, but Detroit was kind of a perfect place to be in a band. There were a ton of rock clubs that really demanded that you play your own music. You weren't playing cover songs. You had all these venues that had PAs by then. You could walk in with your stage gear and try out new music. And the other thing about Detroit, you just spend $150 a month on a flat someplace. And not in very good neighborhoods, but you could live on very little money, which was cool too. So, it was just like kind of the perfect environment. So that's kind of what we were doing. I guess we were just playing music and scraping by. That was the environment.
When did you start writing material for Rotting Piñata? What were some of the first songs that were written for it?
I'm trying to think if there's anything early on that was written for the record. There was a bunch of, like, I don't even know if these songs have made it to the internet. Like, they certainly weren't released as B-sides. We had songs like, trying to remember, Down in Texas. I think we had a song called Down in Texas. It was a song called In the Name of God, Naja Hello. We had a bunch of tunes that, a ton of songs that we had written, but those songs never quite made the record. But early on, I think about some of the early B-sides, like Severed Heart Imams or Welcome Home. There were some things I think that we had played live that never really were released to the masses as well. Like, I think I can recall a song called I Hate Myself. We used to play it, but I can't recall, having it released to the masses.
Rotting Piñata would, go on to, be a successful record. But from the time that you started Sponge, how long did it take to sort of get into a groove to where you guys knew what sound you wanted to be? When did you find sort of your voice for this band?
I think it was immediate. There was no, overthinking or thinking about what the thing was going to sound like. It was just the way the group sounded in rehearsal. And we literally, wrote Plowed and recorded it the same day. So, what version's on the record right now is the version we recorded that day. So there wasn't a lot of plotting, scheming, and calculating regarding the band's sound or direction. It just kind of, it was what it was at the time we started the group.
What's the name what's the story behind the name Sponge?
That probably took more thinking than anything. The songs typically didn't take much thinking, but the band name was like, well, what are we going to do for a name? And we had it pretty much nailed down to two different names, and it was a club we were going to play. The club at the time was called the Ritz, and we rehearsed.
Okay.
Behind the club, which was a big Detroit bar in Roseville, Michigan, and we rehearsed behind the bowling alley next to the collision shop at the club. So we would roll our gear around the back loading door of the club and load in the gear, and we had this discussion with the club owner prior to the gig. He's like, well, what name am I putting on the marquee? And we're like, well, we got two names were kicking around. One is the Electric Cattle Gods, and the other name was Sponge. And he says, I don't have enough letters for the Electric Cattle Gods, so I put Sponge up here. And that's how it rolled.
Electric Cattle Gods, yeah.
Yep.
How did the band start?
The band started, it was kind of pulled out of the ashes of a group we had called Loud House. And the singer of that group, Loud House, quit the band. Loud House released one record on Virgin, I believe, in 1991, and the band was dropped. We were on our way to making a second record when the singer at that time quit, and we attempted to try to find a singer for the group, but we had no luck. But we wanted to keep writing and recording, so in the process of the writing and recording, I was singing on the demos, and things started to roll from there.
At what point did you really start getting serious about writing for the Rotting Piñata album? What was sort of the first songs that you were able to, go in and record?
I think we were serious from the get-go. It's not like there was a point in time where you go, well, we're going to take it serious now and really crush this thing. It was pretty serious effort right from the get-go. But like I mentioned a minute ago regarding Plowed, I think that the process recording Plowed was a very similar process to the rest of the record. We would just continue to write and continue to record and on our own dime, by the way. There was no we were recording, paying for the time ourselves when we recorded Plowed. There was no record deal at the time.
Right.
We pretty much had the record halfway completed by the time the record label started getting involved. So we were well on our way prior to having any kind of label signing.
Okay. And you would record the record at the Loft in Saline, Michigan. Talk about the experience of recording there.
It's a great environment to record. It was the band. And of course, Tim Padlin. And it couldn't have been a better environment just to kind of pin together songs. There was nobody hanging around at that time to tell us what to do or how to do it. And it was just kind of left to us to go, what do we like? What turns us on about what we're doing? And that environment itself was, I think, key to us recording the Rotting Piñata record.
Well, having sort of doing this all by yourselves, DIY, putting it on your own dime, producing it yourself, looking back at that, what did that add to the making of this album? What sort of, what did it bring to this record that would end up being so successful?
It's just a bunch of musicians getting together and going, what do we want to do? What do we like? What turns us on? I think that was key to the whole thing. Really, I mean, that environment was perfect and should be perfect for any group or musician that wants to write or record. And nothing could be better when you're thinking about what it is that you want to do. There's no limits. You can go in there and write exactly what you want to write, say exactly what you want to say. So the freedom of it is just the key to it.
During the time that you're writing and recording Rotting Piñata, what else are you guys doing? How many shows are you doing? How often are you doing shows? Where are you doing shows?
Constantly playing shows. Like I mentioned about the Ritz in Roseville. National bands would come through that venue. It was about 1,200 capacity club, so
yeah, I
we
remember
had the perfect place to. Pardon me?
I remember the Ritz.
Yeah, the Ritz was a cool place. We can go to the Ritz anytime, any day of the week and play a show. But we were constantly playing out of town as well. Ann Arbor, Toledo, Indiana, Chicago was a big one. We would play the Avalon constantly. They'd pay us, a couple $100 of that to come up and play in Chicago. And we jumped in a van. We had a work van and a Buick Regal. And we piled everybody in those vehicles and roll up to Chicago. So, you know, we were constantly playing and writing and getting the recording done.
During this time before,
it's not very sexy, by the way. You know what I mean? There was not a lot of money, so it was just a lot of intestinal fortitude and a lot of like,
right,
just going out there and scraping by.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. Is like during that time, you know, how did you guys get by? You know, with there not being a lot of money, and just doing as many shows that you can. You know, how did you get by?
You barely get by. I mean, you'd be surprised on what you can do without, driving crappy $150 cars, having very little money for rent. Our rehearsal space probably cost us more rent than my flat did, So you're just paying for your bare expenses, being in a band, maybe working some time in a restaurant, flipping bags and burgers. That's about it. So there's nothing very sexy about what had to happen. And there was, no, big job that anybody was involved in at the time either. You know what I mean? So everybody's kind of on the same program.
Right. So yeah, just for like in general, everybody in the band pretty much, didn't have too many attachments outside of just the band itself.
That's correct. Yep. That's correct. And before Sponge, most of us had been in bands for many years prior to Sponge, so we understood what it takes and how to do it. So it's especially being in Detroit, you know what I mean? Giving blood, pawn shops,
At what point would the label interest start to, come you guys' way? Because you guys would eventually put out Rotting Piñata on the work group. So, like, when was label interest starting to sort of show itself towards Sponge?
Oh man, I gotta think sometime in like mid '93 or something like that. I would think. I can't really remember, but I would imagine mid '93.
And how did it go about? What's the story behind finally signing with the work group to put out this record?
We had a manager that was affiliated with our production company in Loud House. And we had split from the production company, and the manager wanted to hang around. So based on, like, everything that we had been doing, when we finally had some songs, we were like, well, let's see what people think of this music. And our manager at the time, he had an office out in L.A., was taking the music around and getting some ears on it. So, and I can't recall exactly what was on those early demos. I really don't know.
Once you signed with the work group to put out this record, what came after that? Was there more songs that were written and recorded after that, or was everything for this record already done?
I think we're still in a process of finishing the recording of the record. I think Nia Menashe was like a early song that we had done, but I'm trying to recall perhaps songs like maybe even Rotting Piñata was a late comer to the record. Raining in My House might have been a later comer as well. Drowning, perhaps. Just trying to recall, but I think Drowning came a bit later.
Okay, all right. The name of the record itself, Rotting Piñata, where did that come from?
We were talking to our sound man, Cool Chris at the time, and Cool Chris, is a legendary Detroit sound guy. Runs sound for all the great bands, punk bands that have come to Detroit over the years, and we always said to ourselves, no matter where we go, we want to try to sound the best we can. So nobody in the band got paid, but we paid our sound guy, Cool Chris, and just because he would make sure we had everything we needed at a gig to sound good. So talking to Cool Chris about Gigi Allen had just died, and we always thought that, I think Gigi threatened to, like, do himself in at a gig even, but we thought that Gigi would have thought enough about it to put his body on tour after he died. And, of course, he never did that, but the words came up, right? Yeah, he would have been a Rotting Piñata. You know what I mean? Like, they would have put his body on display at every gig. So that's kind of how it came up. Cool Chris jokingly said that, and we're like, wow, it sounds like a cool title for something. So I believe it kind of morphed into a tune and morphed into the record title.
Right. For the album artwork for Rotting Piñata, what's the story behind that, and do you remember who did it?
Some folks at Sony put that together, and we have a hidden track on the record called Candy Corn, and it seemed to have resonated with some of the folks in the art department. That's one thing that we would discuss with them regarding some input with the record, but as far as our direct input for that particular cover, that was something that was generated more in house over at the work group.
Let's get into the album itself. Go track by track, and just if you have any stories about the recording of it or what it means or anything, I'd like you to share that with us. The first track on the album is Penny Wheels. What's any good stories or thoughts about that song?
Oh, it's a good live track. It's one of those tracks that kind of got its start in the studio. In the rehearsal studio.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's where that tune got its start. Some of these songs, they get their start, and I'm walking in with a track like Plowed, for example. Plowed and Molly, they kind of were pinned together with the chords and the lyrics relatively quick by me, and then I would bring a song like Molly to the pen and kind of finish it off in rehearsal. So all those nice jangly double guitar riffs that are so cool on that track, Joey and Mike contributed to that. So, as far as the chords and the lyrics and the melody, that was me. And then the boys would finish it off in rehearsal with those cool guitar arrangements.
Okay, next is the title track, Rotting Piñata. Any thoughts about that song?
Well, the big backstory behind that is the story I just told you about Gigi Allen.
Yeah.
The rock singer performance artist, and that the title was kind of the catalyst for the whole idea of the tune. Although the guitar part on that thing, I think we were kind of looking for more of a banjo part, and the main guitar riff that Joe Mazzola wrote. I think Joe wrote that. Maybe Joanne White wrote that, but reminded us more of a banjo than a guitar.
Nice. The next track on the album is Giants.
I think that song was one of those songs that were started. The whole idea was started by a guitar riff, and I think Mike Cross came up with that particular guitar riff. And when he started playing that riff, it was really easy to think about melody and words at that point. That could have been one of those riffs that we started in the rehearsal studio, and put it all together in rehearsal based on that riff.
The next track is Nina Menashe. Any good stories about that?
Yeah, I think once again it's one of those tracks that it was just a killer guitar riff. One of those things that were pinned together in the studio. I remember recording that track in its entirety one late night at the Loft, but the song was completed arrangement-wise in the rehearsal studio.
And the next track is Miles. Anything that sticks out about that record?
Yeah, I think once again the guitar riff. It's one of those guitar riffs that that Mike had put together. Mike even contributed some of the lyrics on that track as well. Even Fields, another guitar riff-driven track. Mike and Tim, the bass player, had some lyric contributions on that track. Yeah, but really started with the guitar riffs.
Next up is Plowed, which would, end up being such a monster of a tune. It was one of those songs that, in my opinion, defined 90s rock. It's like one of those songs you got to you definitely think about when you think about 90s rock, from the mid 90s. It's still being played on the radio. It's in movies. It was just such a monster of a tune. What's your thoughts about just that song in general, and then just the success of it?
The success of the tune is beyond me. It's just one of those songs that you're fortunate enough to be a part of that seems to resonate with people. It's beyond me. I mean, some bands perhaps have a formula for this kind of thing. I do not, but we've been lucky. We got a couple of those songs, Plowed being the big one, Molly being another song that seems to have hung in there and resonated with people over the years. So, yeah, that's a monster track for sure. It's hung around a long time, and to my amazement, by the way.
So at no point, after making that record, you're like, I think we got a hit on our hands with that. Even if it wasn't, even if you didn't think it would be the monster that it would become, did you at all feel that like Plowed would be like, we got a hit on our hands. This might go some places.
Well, I mean, number one, you got to really understand what was on the radio at that time. The modern rock format was brand new. Certainly, people had begun to hear more about bands like the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Jane's Addiction, Nirvana, and those bands became the mainstays, staples, if you will, at that brand new modern rock format, which was a baby at the time. You know what I mean? Rock radio, on the other hand, that had been around for a long time, was still playing Led Zeppelin and AC/DC and REO Speedwagon and that stuff. Which, of course, we're fans of that music. So Plowed didn't sound anything like any of that stuff. So we were pretty amazed when, it was becoming a hit, if you will, at radio. But I really didn't think much of the tune at the time. People at the shows, before the song was released to radio, before the song was released on a record, people were like, yeah, that's a big tune, because we were playing at shows before the release.
Right. Even at that time, when you're saying it was resonating with the crowd, what do you feel like? What was it about Plowed that you feel like resonated with the crowd even before it became a hit song?
If I knew that, I'd write 10 more songs like Plowed today. If I knew that, I'd bottle it and sell it. I don't know. The jangly melody, the guitar riffs, the chorus, I don't know.
I feel like there was something about those beginning riffs, something about just the way the whole song like the flow of the song. There was just a rhythm to it. I feel like, along with your vocals, that just was like infectious, dude. You just had to get on board, man. So I understand why it's it ended up being a hit. It just caught you.
Yeah, man. I've been thinking about putting out 10 songs that sound like Plowed on a record. And call the record 10 songs that sound like Plowed. They make a lot of money.
All right, the next song on the record is "Drownin'." Any thoughts about that song that come to mind?
Once again, generated by the guitar riff. Yep. that opening guitar riff that Mike Cross wrote. That was the catalyst for that tune. Big riff, you know, when you got a great guitar riff like that being played, I can't help but think of something to say or sing.
Yeah, you've mentioned it many times, you know, going through these songs that, you know, a lot of it's generated just from a guitar riff. You know, what does sort of that collaboration between those guitar riffs and what you would bring to the table, you know, lyrically, you know, how does that process go? You know, what's your feelings about just that process?
I don't know. When you got a good guitar riff, it doesn't take much for me to come up with a vocal thing, you know? And, you know, too, the fellas would either present a riff at a rehearsal or they'd have cassette tapes filled up with guitar ideas, you know what I mean? And I would just pick and choose what I would like to put together. But the opposite thing with a song like Plowed, that was generated initially by the guitar chords and the vocal melody. We recorded all of that, and then Mike played the opening riff, which was not even an opening riff at the time. That was the guitar solo. And we were like, wow, that sounds so good as the solo. Let's put it up at the top of the tune. So that song wasn't initially generated by a riff.
I guess that was a good idea to put it at the front of the record, because that's a great opening.
Yeah. It's a great riff. Yep.
All right, the next song on the record is another single, another big hit for you guys, Molly. You know, what's your thoughts about that record?
That's one of those songs that was generated by the me sitting around at home with a guitar and some paper, writing down lyrics and taking it to the band, you know, and those cool jangly guitar lines that are in that tune came in the rehearsal process. And I think that's kind of what made the band different, you know. People sit and go, well, you know, here's another Stone Temple Pilots, Pearl Jam, or that kind of crap. And I'm just like, well, I think the guitar arrangements were really, like, very well thought out. And it made I can't think of another. I mean, Pearl Jam had a couple of guitar players, but didn't utilize guitars the way Sponge did. Those guitar arrangements were really clever. They were smart and well done. So I look at that and I go, that's, I think, what made the group different. You know.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because when I was doing my research, I would see a few reviews that still exist on the net about Sponge and Rotting Piñata, and they would always, you know, bring in the obvious comparisons to the other bands. Whereas, you know, like, you know, you would get lumped in with the Stone Temple Pilots and Pearl Jams and stuff like that, you know, but at the same time, they would almost still praise the band, while it was almost like kind of like a side-eyed, you know, sideways sort of compliment. You know, what were sort of your thoughts about, you know, being a band at that time with these other bands like Stone Temple Pilots and Pearl Jam?
I never thought that there was any valid comparison, you know. I mean, sonically speaking, when Stone Temple Pilots came out, I was like, and they got a lot of criticism for it. There's just blatant criticism on Saturday Night Live, even back then. They would do the weekend updates and openly criticize that the sonic similarities, and I think it was maybe in the voice of some of the early Stone Temple Pilots songs that made people think of Eddie Vedder, I think. So I think that may have been the comparison then, but, you know, I think about just the sonic style of the groups. I just don't see the obvious sonic similarity between the groups. So, you know, in retrospect, you know, people are going to say and think whatever they want, but at the time, I didn't see any kind of serious comparison at all. That's why I felt good about doing what we did, because, you know, frankly, Stone Temple Pilots, you know, they had a number of mid-tempo rock tunes, and Sponge came from more of a punk rock angle on the thing, with songs like Molly and Rotting Piñata and Plowed. they weren't doing anything like that. You know what I mean?
Right.
And neither was Pearl Jam for that matter. Nor do they need to do that kind of thing. You know, the Sponge would do that. You know, I felt more in line with bands like, you know, Green Day or the Goo Goo Dolls. You know what I mean? Than Stone Temple Pilots.
Right. The next song on the record is Fields. You know, anything stick out about the making of that?
Guitar riff. You know, yep, guitar riff. And I had mentioned earlier about the lyrical contribution that Mike and I believe Tim, his brother, made to that. Because the song was a tip of a hat to a friend that had passed away, and they wanted to kind of memorialize their friend via that song, and that's how we kind of angled the lyric and developed the song based on that.
And the next song is Raining. You know, anything stick out about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, a guitar riff-driven song. The lyric is about as honest as it could get. You know, living in my upper flat with a hole in the roof, it was fucking raining in my house. You know what I mean? So it's a metaphor at that point, but I mean, it's like that's where you get a song idea from. It's literally raining in my house.
There's also a hidden track called Candy Corn that you mentioned before when we were talking about the album arts. You know, what's the story behind that?
Yep. The song initially came to the group towards the end of the recording process for Rotting. Mike brought the guitar riff to the studio, and we developed the song. Well, not the song, but the arrangement with the guitars, and we added some drums. And I think it was a song at the time Mike gave the title, The Leaves Are Turning Brown. And we were talking about how we developed that into a song. You know, how do we develop The Leaves Are Turning Brown? But we were like, let's slow the tape down. And we did. We took that track and slowed the tape way down, and it really took on a whole cool kind of new life, and it really, you know, turned us on. And I'm like, immediately, I think it was around, it must have been around fall, because we were talking about the leaves are turning brown and candy corn, and immediately it was this candy corn idea. So it turned into Candy Corn with this huge kind of like echoey Cocteau Twins, you know, vocal, and we just rolled from there. Obviously not a song that's a Sponge track or something that would go on the record and stand up with the rest of his tunes, but that's why we used it as a hidden track.
Nice. You know, Rotting Piñata would, you know, go on to be certified gold by the RIAA, but even though it was released in August of 1994, you know, it didn't enter the Billboard 200 until May of 1995 after the success of Plowed. With you know, and that's, you know, that back then that wasn't a rare thing. You know, albums would have a slow burn like that. But, you know, looking back at the, you know, the success from the time that it's, you know, it was released in 94 to when it actually did, you know, hit the Billboard charts, you know, sort of, you know, what's your thoughts and feelings about that time?
Well, you're right. It was a slow burn. It took a lot of work by a lot of people, the band included, being out there constantly touring, constantly going to radio stations, constantly going to record stores to perform. And folks over at the label bust their ass at the work group to make that record happen. It was a collective army of people believing in a project to make the whole damn thing work. Not to mention the booking agent, management, booking agent, everybody working hard to make that happen. And it's an unknown band, you know, and to develop an unknown group like that takes a lot of energy, money, and time. And, of course, number one, the song. You got to have the song. And apparently we had the song. So it just took a lot of work, and it was a slow burn. Everybody was patient, and everybody busted their ass, so it was cool.
This would be a time when it was a little after the transition that rock would have from, you know, the hair bands of the 80s, the 80s style. You would go into the grunge, the alternative rock. of the 90s. Like you mentioned, the radio that would, eventually embrace you guys would be, was a new thing, still in its infancy. Why do you feel like Sponge and with this Rotting Piñata album that, you were able to, find success with it? And, why did the label continue to be behind you guys, even though you guys are an unknown band?
Well, everybody's got to be an unknown band at some point, Zeppelin was an unknown band at one point. Kiss was an unknown band. I think some folks saw value in the strength of the music, and that record made money. That record recouped pretty quick, which is a unheard of thing.
Yeah.
A lot of new bands, it's rare that a band would get signed, number one. It's rare a band would get signed and release a record. It's rare that a band would get signed, release a record, and the label actually works the record. It's even rarer that a label signs a band, releases a record, works the record, and recoups. So it's really, again, it's a lot of work by a lot of people, but you got to give credit where credit's due. There, tip of the hat, but we had the right songs to help make that happen.
Ballpark figure, how much did it take to make this record that you were able to recoup it?
I don't have a clue. You would have to call somebody over at Sony in the accounting department and start to pin together all the numbers regarding what the overhead for the record was, which, you're talking a major label army of people at 550 Madison Avenue at the time, and talk about dollars in 1994 what they would spend on a record, and then go, well, what's it going to take to recoup that? So it's certainly a pile of cash.
Outside of like all the major label stuff, what do you know how much it took just to record the album? Because like you said, a lot of it you guys came out of your own pocket.
Record the record. Shit, that record was probably recorded for under $10,000 back then.
Right.
Probably cost more to master the record. Afford it. You probably were paying, just minimal dollars to back then,
And shortly after the album would come out, and Plowed would be featured in Empire Records, and that's a song that really sticks out to me, from that movie. A lot of people love that movie. What was sort of your thoughts about it being a part of that film?
At the time, I didn't think too much of it, because that wasn't my bag. Like songs and movies, like it's so popular today, and back then, though, I didn't see a lot of bands doing it. I think Pearl Jam did it, but it wasn't on my radar. It wasn't my concern. All I wanted to do was write songs and record music. I didn't even want to necessarily have to be on the road, but that's part of the whole thing of being in a band. My interest was just recording and writing songs.
When you kind of look back on Rotting Piñata, after its release, its success, 25 years later, after everything we've just talked about, what really sticks out in your mind about, what it meant for you guys and for rock and roll at that time?
To me, it's more important what it meant to rock and roll, and not what it being Sponge or Plowed, it being part of a important time in music. And to be part of an important time in music, to me, me personally, that's the big thing. But just to be part of a lot of groups that were doing something differently than what was going on in the 80s, specifically hair rock or hair metal, that LA thing. And we weren't doing that thing that way. And I think there was just a lot of music that's going to be around for a long, long time that came out of that era. And I wouldn't have thought of it at the time, but again, glad to be part of that.
How do you feel like Rotting Piñata influenced or impacted the Detroit rock music scene at that time, and even 25 years later?
I don't. It didn't influence at all. It didn't at all, because on the heels of our second record, the White Stripes, the garage rock thing was coming out. I think people had enough of, like, grunge rock, post grunge rock. They were moving on to something already. So I don't think Sponge influenced any of the memorable groups that have come out of Detroit. The White Stripes being one of those groups that they did a very different thing. As well, they should have done something very different, because anybody following in our footsteps at that time, it would have been too late. You got to do your own thing, and you got to do it in a timely way. So, yeah, I'm glad we didn't influence anybody, because they'd have been wasting their time.
Right. But, just in sort of like the annals of, Detroit rock history, what do you feel like this, where do you feel like this record, Rotting Piñata, fits in it all? Because it looks like,
it fits into a whole of the 90s, like the Romantics were part of what was going on in the 80s. There was not a lot of, action as far as bands getting signed. Rhythm Corps out of Detroit got signed. The Romantics got signed. The Rockets were signed. There were a bunch of bands trying to do the hair metal thing, but by the time, that thing was coming to a screeching halt, there were bands like Big Chief, that were doing some things. Corey Clark was doing some stuff, but I think that Sponge will be remembered for, like, what happened in the 90s out of Detroit. I would think, or a part of what was going on in the 90s in Detroit. There's a lot of great groups, man. A lot of great groups, man. That just, a lot of people don't know about that come out. The Suicide Machines had their day in the sun too, man. They were a great group. But guys like John Brannon, Negative Approach, you just go, look at what he means to the rock music world. It's just a phenomenal, unthinkable thing. You go, so this guy from Detroit influencing the world with his voice. Brandon did that. I just go, God bless him. But there's this small part of 90s rock history that Sponge can be a part of. I go, God bless us, and you look back in the 80s, Seduce got signed to IRS, and I know there's bands that I'm probably forgetting and I'm not mentioning, but, Sponge had that time in the 90s. It was kind of our minute for a couple of years.
Right. And, looking back to having your minute, how does that feel in comparison to the rest of the band's career? You guys would continue to put out records every few years, but having that minute in the sun, what's your thoughts about that?
You get into a bunch of clubs for free for a while, you know what I mean? Which is nice. Oh, the guys from Sponge are here, let them in. That's cool, that's nice. But to me, the mission has always been to write songs and record. That's it. Not a smart guy. I go, I'm going to continue to do that thing that got us started in the first place. Nobody knows me for any other thing. I mean, people go, well, Vinnie plays drums. Well, sure, I play drums. I play guitar too. But, the point I'm making here is, what do they know me from? A song called Plowed. That's it. And why do they know me from that song? Because I wrote that song. Other than that, why would they know me? They don't, even on a national level, people know me because of that thing. I go, that's cool. So my minute in the sun, was cool here in Detroit, but I feel I got a lot of minutes in the sun, provided I keep making records and write songs and record.
Right. And how did you go about continuing to put out records, every few years so often, after having your debut be a success, was that something you thought about, or it just didn't really come to mind? You just didn't care. You just wanted to continue to put out records, even if it never, reached the success of that first record, Rotting Piñata.
again, it's all I care about. It's all I do. I'm not concerned about what it's going to cost or what the cost is. I'm going to do what I'm supposed to be doing, which is recording and putting out records, recording, writing songs. That's it. It's about as simple as that. And I go, you know what? I did it back then. I'll keep doing it now. It's been a long time since, we recorded Rotting Piñata, and I'm still doing it. So I go, what's my motivation? Writing and recording. And it doesn't matter if we got a major label or any label at all. I can still do it. So
right. And before we get out of here, let's talk about what's going on with Sponge these days. I hear that you guys are going to go on a national tour with the Nixons in December. You have a new label deal, I hear, and then you're going to be doing a big show at Thanksgiving Eve at St. Andrew's Hall for the 25th anniversary of Rotting Piñata. Tell us what you're all, what you're working on. Give us more information about all that news.
Well, you said it. You summed it up. Yes, we'll be on the road with it in December, starting on December 3rd, I believe. And we got the show at St. Andrew's Hall with Crud, Solid Frog, and Voyager on November 27th. And we're always releasing, recording music, so there'll be some new stuff coming out as well. So we're excited.
What can we expect from the show at St. Andrews?
Well, Crud will be on that bill. Solid Frog and Voyager, and we're partnering up with the Pope Francis Center as our charity element for the night as well. And the Pope Francis Center is in downtown Detroit, and they do the wonderful work that they do down there of giving counseling and direction to folks that are addicted and folks that have no address. Essentially, some folks that are homeless. So they help the homeless and addicted down there, challenged folks, and they do a wonderful job at it. And we're happy to, during the holiday, be a part of shedding some light on what they do and trying to raise some money for them. So,
is part of the ticket sales going to go to them, or what's the deal with that?
Yeah. Part of a portion of ticket proceeds go to the Pope Francis Center, and we're also going to be doing some auction work, and people can bring in items like socks and underwear, which they need. They can bring those and drop them off. They need socks and underwear like crazy in the wintertime for the needy at the Pope Francis Center.
Yeah, that's a need that is always needed. People always bring other stuff, but for the most part, socks and underwear is something that is severely needed at any time. They're always in shortage of that in comparison to other things that people donate.
Right on. Yep.
And you're a part of the band Crud also. As it was put to me, it's Vinnie's alter ego industrial band. Talk more about Crud.
People should go out and get the records, Crud's got 2 records out, Devil at the Wheel, and Crud on Monster Island. David Black from Seduce plays guitar in the band. Dana Forrester and her husband James, they play in Dead and Five. They cover bass and drums in the band. And, of course, the lovely Danielle Arsenal is sharing vocals with me in that band, as she has for nearly 20 years.
Nice. So it's going to be a fun time at St. Andrews and Thanksgiving Eve. And do you have any more information about, new Sponge music coming out?
Could be something coming out here shortly in November. We have a song called Uber and a Fifth of Tequila that we wrote. It's not quite textbook Sponge music, but we wrote it for a pub crawl thing that we usually do, and a label decided they love the song so much they want to work at the radio. So that looks like it's coming up here in the fall pretty soon.
Nice. just to close out, this interview, and thank you for, talking Rotting Piñata for me for the past hour. And what I would like to just close out with is that, Rotting Piñata was a very, successful record, had, huge song with Plowed. And like you said, it kind of had this, it was a part of this little hole in Detroit music history. Things before it and things after it would be, so much different. But you guys were able to, pop out and have the success with this record. What's your final thoughts about Rotting Piñata in regards to just what it is and what it's meant in the world of rock and roll?
Well, I'm always humbled about what the record has done. If we seem to have been a part of a listener's day, moment, somewhere to have given music to somebody and they spend their time to listen to our music somewhere on this planet, that's a pretty heavy thing. And even if they do it once, and they've done it millions of times, they listen, they decide Sponge is part of their musical landscape, and just to be part of rock and roll, the rock and roll landscape in some small way, to me, I am thrilled about. I always will be thrilled about. But at the end of the day, I just want to write songs and record, and try to keep doing that.
Well, that sounds awesome, my friend. Before we get out of here, where can people go online to get more information about, what you're up to, what Sponge is up to, anything else you want to promote?
SpongeTheBand.com is our website, or they can go to Facebook /Sponge Rocks.
All right, great, my friend. It was awesome to talk with you, get all the information about Rotting Piñata, and dude, thank you again for doing this interview with me.
Good to talk to you, Kelly. Have a good day.
Thank you for listening to the Renaissance Soul podcast, hosted and produced by myself, Kelly K. Fresh Frazier, empowered by Anchor at anchor.fm/Renaissance Soul. Renaissance Soul theme music provided by Steve O. You can find more of his productions at iamstevo.bandcamp.com, and that's EYEAMSTEVEO.bandcamp.com. Renaissance Soul is available on all streaming platforms. Please rate and review on Apple Podcasts and Stitcher. If you want to support Renaissance Soul, please consider pledging via Patreon at patreon.com/freshastheword. Follow Renaissance Soul on social media, on Instagram at RenSoul Podcast and on Twitter at RenSoulPod. And join the Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/freshastheword. And for more information on Renaissance Soul, visit freshasthepodcast.com. Thank you for listening and your support. Goodbye and good night.
Renaissance Soul.